Ghostwatch, 1992. In 1992, the BBC aired a program that would become one of the most shocking moments in television history. It was shown on Halloween night as a special live investigation into a haunted house in North London. The program was presented as a real broadcast, with well-known TV hosts like Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green, and Craig Charles appearing as themselves. But what most viewers didn't realize was that the entire thing had been pre-recorded weeks before and was completely fictional. The story of Ghostwatch followed a family who claimed their home was haunted by a ghost. The children called Pipes. The BBC crew went into the house with cameras to film the supposed haunting live, while Parkinson and a doctor stayed in the studio taking phone calls from the public. Everything was made to look real: the shaky camera work, the interviews, even the phone number shown on screen. But that night, millions of people tuned in thinking they were watching a real ghost hunt, not a drama. And because there was no internet or on-demand TV in 1992, people couldn't really check whether it was real or not. If you missed the short introduction that said it was written by a screenwriter named Stephen Volk, you might never have realized it was fake. The show was broadcast at 9:25 p.m., an odd time that meant many missed the first few minutes. So when strange things began happening on screen, lights flickering, banging sounds, the hosts reacting in fear, people at home started to panic. By the end of the night, 11 million people had watched Ghostwatch, including many children who had been allowed to stay up for Halloween. The phone number shown on screen was real, and when people called it, they were supposed to hear a message saying the show wasn't real. But the phone lines were quickly jammed, leaving many callers hearing only an engaged tone. This made it seem even more believable, as though the ghost itself was somehow interfering with the phones. As the show went on, the haunting grew more violent. Furniture moved, the children screamed, and finally something terrible happened live on camera. Many people turned off their TVs, too frightened to finish watching. Those who did see the end realized it was fiction, but for thousands of others, the damage was already done. That night, police stations, newspapers, and the BBC itself were flooded with calls from terrified viewers. Some said their children were vomiting from fear. Others claimed adults had fainted or even soiled themselves. One woman reportedly sent the BBC a bill for her husband's ruined trousers. Soon, doctors began reporting cases of real trauma in children who had watched the program. Some kids refused to sleep in their own beds or go upstairs alone. They suffered nightmares, panic attacks, and flashbacks. One boy became so afraid of ghosts that he developed lasting anxiety and had to sleep with the lights on for weeks. But the most tragic story came from an 18-year-old man named Martin Denham from Nottingham. Martin had learning difficulties and was said to have the mind of a 13-year-old. After watching Ghostwatch, he became convinced his home was haunted, just like the one on TV. He refused to turn off the lights and told his parents that he could hear banging noises in the pipes, just like in the show. 5 days later, Martin was found dead in a nearby park, leaving behind a note that said, "Mother, do not be upset. If there are ghosts, I will now be one." Martin's parents blamed the BBC, and the Broadcasting Standards Commission ruled that Ghostwatch had gone too far. They said the show blurred the line between fact and fiction in a way that was unfair and distressing, especially since it featured familiar presenters who were trusted by families. That Halloween night, the ghost named Pipes may have been fictional, but in the minds of millions, he became something far more real. Albert Dryden shooting, 1991. Albert Dryden was an ordinary man living in County Durham, England, a quiet area filled with history, small towns, and countryside views. He was born in 1940 and grew up with 7 brothers and sisters. Most of his life, he worked as a steelworker, but after losing his job in his 40s, things began to change for him. One of his biggest interests was guns. He got his first firearms license at 17, but it didn't take long before he started building illegal weapons like mortars and rockets in his spare time. Police once raided his home and found a stash of these weapons, which got him into trouble. But after that, he mostly stayed out of the law's way. In the 1980s, Albert bought a small piece of land about 5 miles from his home, which he shared with his mother. He started putting up small buildings like sheds and greenhouses. He met a man named Harry Collinson, a friendly local council worker who dealt with building permissions. Harry would visit Albert's land, give him advice, and try to help him follow the rules. But their friendship slowly turned sour when Albert decided to build a home on the property. Not a normal one, but a strange single-story house built mostly underground, with only the roof showing above the surface. The council told Albert that this design was illegal and refused to give him planning permission. But Albert didn't care. He believed it was his land, so he went ahead and built it anyway. The council then sent him warnings and official notices demanding that he tear it down. Albert refused, arguing that since most of the house was below ground, it didn't break any rules. The argument dragged on for years, and during this time, Albert's mother passed away. He blamed the council and their endless paperwork for her death, saying the stress had killed her. After that, his anger and bitterness only grew stronger. He dug trenches around his property, built fences and barriers, and refused to let anyone near it. Eventually, the council decided they had to act. They planned to send a demolition crew to tear down the illegal building. Some members even suggested doing it secretly at night to avoid confrontation, but Harry didn't agree. He believed that doing it in daylight, in the open, was the right and fair way. So on June 21, 1991, the crew arrived at the site along with Harry, several police officers, and a news team that came to film the event. At around 9 in the morning, Albert showed up. He looked calm but tense as he walked toward the group. He talked briefly with Harry. No one knows exactly what was said, and then, without warning, Albert pulled out a gun and shot him point blank. Panic broke out instantly. People screamed and ran for cover as Albert fired more shots. A police officer and a reporter were hit, and bullets even struck the machinery that had been brought to demolish the house. Then Albert walked over to where Harry had fallen and shot him again, killing him instantly. Police surrounded the area, and what followed was a tense standoff. Albert refused to come out, and negotiators tried to talk him down using a phone line. After 2 hours around 11 a.m., Albert finally came out to the fence without his gun. One of the officers noticed and quickly tackled him to the ground, arresting him on the spot. The scene was shocking. Harry Collinson was dead, and the whole incident had been caught on camera by the news crew. The story spread across the UK and beyond. It wasn't just the murder itself that disturbed people. It was the fact that it happened live on television, in front of journalists, police, and workers who had come expecting a simple demolition, not a deadly shooting. What began as a small argument over a building turned into one of the most disturbing moments ever caught on British TV. Boxer Benny Kid Paret, 1962. On March 24, 1962, millions of people tuned in to watch a live boxing match on ABC's Fight of the Week. It was a championship fight between two men, Benny Kid Paret from Cuba and Emil Griffith from the U.S. Virgin Islands. The two had already fought each other twice before, and this was their third and most important match. No one could have imagined how tragically it would end. Benny Paret was 25 years old, a strong and proud fighter who had already been a world champion. Emil Griffith was just a year younger and one of the most talented boxers of his time. But behind his success, Griffith carried a secret. He was bisexual, something that was considered shameful and even illegal at the time. He kept this hidden from almost everyone, though many in the boxing world quietly suspected it. The tension between the two men began long before they stepped into the ring. At the weigh-in, just before the fight, Paret insulted Griffith in front of everyone. He mocked him in Spanish using a cruel slur for gay men, calling him maricón. He even made lewd gestures, laughing as others joined in. What Paret didn't realize was that Griffith spoke Spanish and understood every word. The insult hit him hard. For a man trying to keep his private life secret, it was the worst thing someone could say. He lunged at Paret in anger, but his trainer held him back and told him to save it for the fight. Paret also had his own struggles. Just days before the match, he had been humiliated when a guard at a zoo in Florida refused to let him and his family in because they were black. His wife, Lucy, said she saw tears in his eyes that day. She also had a terrible feeling about the fight. She had been having nightmares that something awful would happen and begged him not to go through with it. But Paret said he couldn't back out. Too much money was on the line, and his manager wouldn't allow it. The fight took place at Madison Square Garden in New York. The crowd was loud, the cameras were rolling, and millions were watching live on TV. At first, it seemed like a normal fight. Griffith was ahead for most of the early rounds, but in the 6th round, Paret landed a strong punch that knocked Griffith down. Griffith looked shaken, but he got up and kept fighting. Then came the 12th round. Near the end of the round, Griffith cornered Paret against the ropes. What happened next shocked everyone watching. Griffith began landing punch after punch to Paret's head. He threw almost 30 unanswered blows while Paret stood helpless, barely conscious, held up only by the ropes. The referee, Ruby Goldstein, didn't stop the fight until it was far too late. When he finally pulled Griffith away, Paret collapsed, completely unconscious. Doctors rushed into the ring and worked on him for several minutes before carrying him out on a stretcher. He never woke up again. 10 days later, Benny Kid Paret died from massive brain injuries. Griffith was devastated. He cried in the ring that night and later tried to visit Paret in the hospital, but he wasn't allowed in. He said he had nightmares about the fight for the rest of his life. He continued boxing for many years and became one of the greats, but that moment haunted him forever. The fight also changed boxing on television. People were horrified to have seen a man die from a live broadcast. Within 2 years, ABC stopped airing live boxing matches completely. The death of Benny Paret became one of the most disturbing and unforgettable moments ever shown on TV. On June 30th, 2025, in a place called Bacabal, Brazil, a news reporter named Lenildo Frazão was doing a live report, standing in the middle of the Mearim River. He was there to cover a tragic story about a young girl named Risa, who had drowned in that same river just 1 day earlier. According to people who saw what happened, Risa had gone swimming with her friends. The area where they chose to swim was known by locals to be dangerous because the water was deep, the current was strong, and the riverbed had uneven holes that could suddenly pull people down. Still, many people continued to swim there, and Risa and her friends decided to do the same. At first, everything seemed fine, but soon people nearby heard a young girl screaming and saw someone struggling in the water. Risa's friends panicked and ran to get help, but by the time they returned, she had disappeared under the water. Sadly, no one could find her. The next day, Lenildo was at the same river, reporting live about how risky the place was. The water was almost chest-high where he stood, and he showed viewers how unpredictable and strong the currents could be. Everything seemed normal at first, but during the middle of the segment, something unexpected happened. As Lenildo stepped a little deeper into the river, he suddenly froze and looked terrified. He quickly rushed out of the water, clearly shaken. When his crew asked what was wrong, he said that something had brushed against his leg under the water. He told them it felt like an arm, though he tried to convince himself that maybe it was just a fish or his imagination, especially since the story of Risa's death was still fresh in his mind. Still, he refused to go back in the water, saying he had a bad feeling about it. Right after this moment, the live broadcast ended, and the news crew decided to contact local authorities to report what had happened. Lenildo said later that he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was in that river. When divers and firefighters arrived to search the area where he had been standing, they made a horrifying discovery. The body of a young girl was found underwater. After an autopsy was done, it was confirmed that the body belonged to Risa, the girl who had drowned the day before. This meant that what Lenildo had felt touch his leg during the live broadcast was likely Risa's arm. The event deeply affected Lenildo. He explained that you never expect something so horrifying to occur while doing your job, and the feeling of what he touched in that water would stay with him for the rest of his life. Midnight Rider train accident, 2014. On February 20th, 2014, in Georgia, USA, a freight train driver saw something strange ahead on the tracks. On a bridge crossing the Altamaha River, several people were standing near a metal hospital bed that was lying right across the tracks. The driver blew his horn and hit the brakes, but the train was moving too fast. It was impossible to stop in time. What happened next would become one of the most shocking and tragic accidents in film history. This story begins with musician Gregg Allman, who was famous for his role in the Allman Brothers Band. Music had always been a part of his life, and even after losing his brother Dwayne in a motorcycle crash in 1971, Gregg continued his career. He went on to win awards, make hit songs, and earn a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Despite his success, he struggled with addiction and personal problems. His life story was full of pain, passion, and resilience, which made it perfect for a movie. Director Randall Miller and producer Jody Savin decided to make a film about him called Midnight Rider, based on his autobiography My Cross to Bear. Filming started in early 2014. On one of the first shooting days, the team set out to a quiet area near the Altamaha River in Georgia. There, they planned to film a dream sequence on an old but still active railway bridge. Actor William Hurt, who was cast to play Gregg Allman, was supposed to lie in a hospital bed placed across the tracks while cameras rolled. The setup was dangerous from the start. Hurt even asked the assistant director, Hilary Schwartz, if it was safe. She confidently told him yes. Trusting her, the crew went ahead. Soon after filming began, disaster struck. A freight train came speeding toward them at nearly 60 miles per hour. The crew had less than a minute to react. Chaos erupted as everyone tried to escape. They had to run toward the oncoming train to reach safety. Some tried to move the heavy metal bed and expensive equipment off the tracks, but there was no time. William Hurt, barefoot and terrified, ran across the wooden bridge, splinters digging into his feet. He managed to escape, but not everyone did. When the train reached the bridge, 3 crew members and the bed were still there. The train smashed into the hospital bed, sending pieces flying everywhere. One large piece hit 27-year-old camera assistant Sarah Jones, throwing her into the train and killing her instantly. Several others were injured, and the set was left in ruins. The day had only been meant as a camera test, so there was no medic on site to help. Investigators soon discovered that the film crew did not have permission to film on the bridge. The company that owned the tracks, CSX Transportation, had denied permission twice, but the filmmakers went ahead anyway. Several people were charged, including director Randall Miller, producer Jody Savin, assistant director Hilary Schwartz, and executive producer Jay Sedrish. Miller ended up serving a year in jail and was banned from ever working on set safety again. Sarah's family also received a settlement of over $10 million. Despite the tragedy, the production company initially wanted to continue making the film, but they were met with public outrage. Gregg Allman himself begged them to stop, saying, "Your desires as a filmmaker should not outweigh your obligations as a human being." Thousands joined online campaigns demanding that the movie be canceled. Actor William Hurt quit, and soon the whole project collapsed. In Sarah Jones's memory, her friends and family created a movement called Safety for Sarah. It encouraged film workers to speak up about unsafe conditions and help spread awareness about safety on movie sets. They even developed an app for reporting safety violations and funded scholarships for film students. On December 4th, 2010, millions of people across Germany, Austria, and Switzerland tuned in to watch the live broadcast of Wetten, one of Europe's biggest and most popular TV shows. It was a family show that had been running for more than 26 years, where ordinary people would perform unusual or daring challenges, while celebrity guests would bet on whether they could succeed or not. The night began like any other, filled with excitement and energy, but it soon turned into one of the most shocking moments ever seen on live television. One of the contestants that evening was a 23-year-old student named Samuel Koch. His challenge was daring but fascinating. He had bet that he could jump over several moving cars using special spring-loaded stilts, also known as powerbox. These devices were attached to his legs and allowed him to bounce and jump high into the air. During rehearsals, Samuel had practiced the stunt successfully, and both the audience and the crew were confident it would go well during the live show. Even more emotional was the fact that one of the cars in the act would be driven by his own father. The performance started and the first jump went perfectly. Samuel cleared the car smoothly and the crowd cheered loudly. But on his second attempt, he struggled a bit. When he tried again, he made the third jump, but things were beginning to look risky. Then during the fourth attempt, everything went terribly wrong. As the car driven by his father approached, Samuel jumped, but he mistimed it by just a fraction of a second. Instead of soaring over the car, he hit it head-on and crashed face-first onto the ground. The entire studio went silent. It wasn't clear how serious the situation was. The cameras quickly turned away from Samuel's still body and instead showed the shocked faces of the audience. Medical staff rushed onto the stage to help, and the host, Thomas Gottschalk, stood frozen, unsure what to do. After several tense minutes with no updates, Gottschalk decided to stop the show. He announced that they would cut to other programming while the doctors treated Samuel. For the first time in the show's long history, the live broadcast had to be completely shut down. For about half an hour, viewers saw only recorded musical performances while everyone waited anxiously for news. Finally, Thomas Gottschalk returned to the screen. His face was pale and his voice heavy with emotion. He said that Samuel was conscious and could speak, and that he could feel his legs. But still, he explained that continuing the show would not feel right. "This is a program meant to entertain people," he said, "and no one can act cheerful after what we just saw." The decision to cancel the rest of the show was widely respected and supported by both viewers and celebrities. Later that night and the following morning, news outlets across Europe reported updates about Samuel's condition. Doctors confirmed that he had been placed in an artificial coma and had undergone surgery overnight. His injuries were very serious, but not immediately life-threatening. For many people, that night served as a painful reminder that even something meant to be fun and lighthearted can take a tragic turn in an instant. What was supposed to be a moment of courage and talent ended up becoming one of the most disturbing moments ever broadcast live on television. Shannon Stone, 2011. Shannon Stone, a 39-year-old firefighter, attended a Texas Rangers baseball game with his young son. Outfielder Josh Hamilton tossed a ball toward them, but Stone leaned over the railing to catch it, lost balance, and fell 20 feet onto concrete. He was briefly conscious, asking rescuers to check on his son, but died from head injuries shortly after. A statue now stands in his honor at the stadium. Daniel V. Jones' live tragedy, 1998. In April of 1998, a man named Daniel Victor Jones shocked millions of people when he took his own life on live television in Los Angeles. Daniel was a 40-year-old maintenance worker from Long Beach, California, who had been working at a hotel for several years. To most people who knew him, he seemed like a quiet and normal man, but inside he was deeply hurt and frustrated. He had been told that he was HIV positive and also had cancer, and he believed his health insurance company was not helping him get the care he needed. He said that every time he tried to get an appointment, it would take weeks or even months, and he felt like nobody cared that he was suffering. Daniel felt trapped, hopeless, and angry at the way he was being treated. He told one of his friends that he had found a lump on his neck and that the doctors had later confirmed it was cancer. By the end of April, he believed that he didn't have much time left to live. Instead of dying quietly, he decided to do something that would make the world pay attention. He wanted to show everyone how broken the system was, and he planned his death as a form of protest. He even recorded a video message before doing it, where he said that he was in pain, that the disease was affecting his brain, and that he didn't want to lose control of himself. He said it wasn't anyone's fault but his own, and he didn't want to hurt anyone else, only himself. On the afternoon of April 30th, 1998, Daniel drove his gray pickup truck onto an overpass that connected two major freeways in Los Angeles. He parked his truck in the middle of the bridge, blocking traffic, and called 911. During the call, he calmly told the operator that he was unhappy with his life and that he was going to draw attention to his situation. He also said he had weapons and bombs with him, but that he wouldn't hurt anyone. He told the operator that he had made sure there were no cars close to him before he stopped, because he didn't want anyone to get caught in what he was about to do. Soon, news helicopters arrived at the scene and began filming the strange standoff. On live TV, people could see Daniel sitting in his truck, talking on his phone and throwing firebombs onto the road. At one point, he threw a blue backpack over the bridge that contained a videotape and a message written on a banner that read, "HMOs are in it for the money. Live free, live safe, or die." The police tried to talk to him, but he didn't respond. Suddenly, flames burst from his truck, and Daniel, now on fire, stumbled out. People watching on television couldn't believe what they were seeing. In those final moments, Daniel walked to the edge of the overpass, pulled a shotgun from his truck, and ended his life in front of the cameras. The whole thing lasted nearly an hour, and it brought the entire freeway to a stop. Unfortunately, his dog, who had been sitting in the truck, also died in the fire. Millions of people, including children, had watched the horrifying moment live, because several TV stations were broadcasting the event without delay. The next day, there was a huge public outcry about why such graphic footage was shown. Many viewers were angry and upset, saying the stations should have cut away before the incident happened. Some channels later apologized and said they never expected it to happen so suddenly. Eloá Pimentel hostage incident, 2008. On October 13, 2008, in São Paulo, Brazil, a 15-year-old girl named Eloá Cristina Pimentel came home from school with her best friend, Nayara Silva. They were joined by two male friends to work on a school project at her family's apartment. Everything seemed normal until they suddenly heard a loud noise at the door. Moments later, the door burst open, and standing there was 22-year-old Lindenberg Alves, Eloá's ex-boyfriend. He was holding a gun. Eloá and Lindenberg had once been in a relationship that started when she was only 12 and he was 19. From the beginning, it was a troubled relationship. Lindenberg was known for having a bad temper and would often get jealous and angry easily. He became controlling and would even follow Eloá around town, watching who she talked to. Their relationship was full of arguments and emotional abuse until Eloá finally decided to end it. But Lindenberg refused to accept that it was over. In his mind, if he couldn't have her, no one could. Now, standing in her home with a gun, he began yelling at everyone. He slapped Eloá, threatened to kill her, and said he would also kill himself. The other three friends were terrified and begged him to let them go. After some time, he released the two boys, but he kept Eloá and Nayara trapped inside. Her father, Aldo, arrived home shortly after and realized his daughter was being held hostage. Police soon surrounded the building, beginning a tense standoff that would go on for days. As news spread, reporters rushed to the scene. Cameras pointed at the apartment window, broadcasting everything live. The country was glued to their TVs, watching every second unfold. Lindenberg, seeing himself on TV, started playing up for the cameras. He forced Eloá to appear at the window and waved to show she was okay, even though she was terrified. At one point, he fired shots out of the window, narrowly missing reporters below. It was clear he enjoyed the attention, and this made the situation even more dangerous. To try and calm things down, police cut the power so he couldn't watch the news anymore. This angered him, and he hit Eloá. But after more talks, he agreed to release Nayara if the power was turned back on. That left only Eloá trapped with him, and negotiations continued for hours as the situation dragged on into its third day. Then, something unbelievable happened. A TV reporter managed to find the apartment's phone number and called Lindenberg directly, without police permission. He pretended to be a friend, then admitted he was a reporter, and even asked to speak to Eloá on the phone. During the call, Eloá, weak and scared, told her family she loved them. The reporter asked her to repeat her words so they could get a better recording. The call ended, but it made Lindenberg feel even more famous. He now saw himself as the center of a huge national story, watched by millions. In the following days, the media continued to interfere, broadcasting everything police said and did, which Lindenberg could hear on TV. This made it almost impossible for police to act. When officers planned a rescue, he always seemed to know. At one point, he even spoke on another live TV interview, while people outside gathered to watch as if it were entertainment. After more than 4 long days, police tried to bring the situation to an end. They sent Nayara back to help negotiate, but Lindenberg pulled her inside again, making her a hostage once more. Reporters kept filming, shouting, and calling the apartment, while the world watched helplessly. By this point, the standoff had lasted over 100 hours, the longest in Brazil's history. The media's non-stop coverage had turned a tragedy into a live spectacle. Their constant interference gave Lindenberg power and attention, making him unpredictable and impossible to control. On the 5th day of the standoff, police decided to end it. Lindenberg had become unstable, yelling that he wouldn't go to jail. At around 6 p.m. on October 17, 2008, police used an explosive to break down the apartment door and stormed inside. Lindenberg fired 2 shots as they entered. Both Eloá and Nayara were hit. Nayara in the face, but she survived. Eloá was shot in the head and leg. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital in critical condition. For 3 days, doctors tried to save her, but on October 20th, 15-year-old Eloá Cristina Pimentel died. Brazil was heartbroken and furious, blaming both police for their failed rescue and the media for turning her suffering into a spectacle. Investigations later showed that the police plan was poorly handled and that live coverage made things worse by feeding Lindenberg's need for attention. Lindenberg Alves was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder. In 2012, he claimed the shooting was an accident, but the court found him guilty and sentenced him to 98 years, though Brazilian law limited it to 30. Bus 174 Hostage Crisis, 2000. On June 12, 2000, in Rio de Janeiro, a city bus of Line 174 was making its regular route through the Jardim Botânico area when a man named Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento got on board. He was barefoot, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and didn't pay the fare. At first, no one thought much of it, but soon passengers noticed that he was carrying a gun. Sandro was a homeless man who had been using drugs, and as he sat near the window, some people became visibly nervous. One of the passengers tried to alert a nearby police car, and when the officers noticed, they began following the bus. That moment was when everything changed, and Sandro decided to take control of the bus, starting what would become one of the most shocking hostage situations ever seen live on television in Brazil. As the police tried to stop the bus, it finally came to a halt after about 20 minutes. Some passengers managed to escape through the windows and back door, but 10 women were trapped inside, now hostages of a man who seemed confused, unstable, and desperate. What made this even more terrifying was that the entire event was being broadcast live on TV, with cameras surrounding the bus as the situation unfolded for hours. To understand how Sandro reached this point, it's important to know a bit about his past. He was born in 1978 in a poor neighborhood of São Gonçalo. When he was only 11, his mother was murdered in front of him by 2 men inside the small bar she ran. After her death, Sandro had nowhere to go and ended up living on the streets of Rio. He was also one of the few survivors of the Candelaria massacre in 1993, where police officers killed 8 homeless children sleeping near a church. Many of those children were his friends. From that point on, Sandro's life spiraled further into hardship, crime, and drug use. Back on that June day, inside Bus 174, Sandro shouted and waved his gun, threatening the hostages and demanding strange things like grenades and more weapons. He even asked the police to give him a hat from their uniform, which he wore proudly while pacing around the bus. His behavior was unstable, sometimes calm, other times shouting in anger. The hostages were terrified, but they tried to talk to him and keep him from losing control. At one point, Sandro forced one of the women to write messages on the bus window with lipstick, warning that everyone would die at 6 o'clock. During the long 4-hour standoff, Sandro released a few people, including an older woman who suffered a stroke inside the bus. But the tension only grew worse as time went on. The remaining hostages, including a young woman named Geisa, were terrified. Geisa was just 21 years old, a kind woman who worked as a teacher and had moved to Rio, looking for a better life. Sandro often held her tightly, pointing his gun at her head to show the police that he was serious. Finally, after hours of chaos, Sandro decided to leave the bus, using Geisa as a human shield. He walked down the steps with his arm wrapped around her neck and his gun pressed against her side. As they stepped out, police officers aimed their weapons, trying to save her, but in the panic, one officer fired and missed, hitting Geisa by mistake. In that split second, Sandro also fired his gun at her several times. She was rushed to the hospital but didn't survive. Later reports revealed that Geisa had been pregnant. After the shooting, officers tackled Sandro and threw him into a police van as an angry crowd tried to attack him. Moments later, he was found dead inside the van. The autopsy showed that he died of asphyxiation while in police custody. The Bus 174 hostage crisis became one of Brazil's most disturbing live TV events, not only because of the tragic ending, but also because it exposed deep issues in the country: poverty, social neglect, police violence, and how the system had failed both the victims and Sandro himself. It remains one of the most haunting and talked about moments ever broadcast on Brazilian television. Phoenix helicopter crash during police chase, 2007. On July 27, 2007, a normal day in Phoenix, Arizona, turned into one of the most shocking live TV moments ever seen. It began when police tried to pull over a stolen pickup truck. Before they could stop the driver, he suddenly threw the truck into reverse, smashed into a police car, and sped away. A high-speed chase began, and soon the whole city was watching. As the chase continued through the streets, several local news stations sent their helicopters into the air to film the event. Police chases were known to grab attention, and in the race to capture the best footage, 5 different news helicopters ended up flying over the same area. Each one wanted to broadcast the chase live for their viewers, who couldn't look away, wondering how it would all end. But no one watching could have imagined what was about to happen. Among the helicopters were 2 that would soon be at the center of tragedy. One belonged to Channel 15, flown by veteran pilot Craig Smith with photographer Rick Krolak beside him. The other was Channel 3's helicopter, flown by experienced pilot Scott Bowerbank with photographer Jim Cox. All 4 were skilled professionals, used to flying over busy city scenes while reporting live from above. Because so many helicopters were in the same area, air traffic control gave them permission to fly under what's called visual flight rules. This meant that each pilot was responsible for watching the sky and avoiding other helicopters. But this was harder than it sounded, with 6 helicopters in total, including a police chopper, flying close together over the same target on the ground. The air was crowded and chaotic. The pilots also had a lot to manage at once. They had to stay in contact with air traffic control, listen to police radio, talk with their newsroom, and communicate with the photographers sitting beside them. On top of all that, both Craig Smith and Scott Bowerbank were acting as reporters, giving live commentary about the chase while still flying. They were also watching the footage being filmed to make sure it looked right for TV. It was a huge amount to focus on, and in such a busy sky, one small distraction could mean disaster. As the suspect on the ground abandoned his stolen truck and tried to steal another car, both pilots focused on the action below. Viewers watching the live broadcast could hear the reporters describing what they saw. But suddenly, mid-sentence, the footage from Channel 3 cut out. Moments later, Channel 15's camera showed a quick, startled shout from Craig Smith before his screen went black too. The 2 helicopters had collided in mid-air. The wreckage fell into Steel Indian School Park, right in the heart of Phoenix. Both pilots and both photographers were killed instantly. Miraculously, no one on the ground was hurt. It was a heartbreaking moment, and everyone watching knew they had just witnessed something truly tragic. The suspect in the chase was caught soon after. At first, police considered charging him for the deaths of the 4 crew members, but it was later decided that the crash was not directly his fault. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board looked into what happened and quickly realized how overworked the pilots had been. They were trying to fly safely, report live, manage several radios, and watch both the sky and the ground all at once. It was simply too much for any one person to handle. After the crash, new safety rules were recommended. Pilots would focus only on flying, while reporters or news anchors on the ground would handle commentary. Helicopters were also required to keep a safe distance from each other, and new technology made it easier to film from farther away. Many stations began sharing helicopters instead of each having their own, cutting both cost and risk. The Phoenix helicopter crash was a harsh lesson for the news industry. 4 people lost their lives trying to bring viewers a story, and their final moments were seen live by thousands. Tetsushi Yanagida's Fall, 2008. It happened on Saturday, June 14, 2008. A TV station in Japan called Television Miyazaki was airing a live show. On this day, they were filming a game in the rice fields of Takachi Hocho. The game was simple. Contestants stood back to back on a small wooden platform above shallow, muddy water. When the game started, they tried to push each other off without turning around. The last person standing would win, while the loser would fall into the mud and be covered in it. The show started normally, with the first round going smoothly. One contestant fell into the mud, getting completely covered, and everyone laughed. It looked like a typical funny Japanese game show, full of energy and excitement. The audience and crew were having a good time. The fun continued when the contestants asked Tetsushi Yanagida, one of the hosts, to join the game. After some convincing, he agreed, and the crowd cheered. As soon as the round began, it became clear he had little chance of winning. He immediately lost his balance and fell. In a split second, he tried to save himself by diving forward, landing headfirst into the muddy water below. The water was very shallow, only about 6 inches deep, with a thick layer of mud underneath. When Tetsushi's head hit the bottom, his neck broke, and he became paralyzed from the neck down. He could no longer move his body. It was a tragic accident. What made the situation even worse was how the crew reacted. They did not realize Tetsushi was seriously hurt. They thought he was joking, pretending to fall, and playing around. Believing it was part of the show, they continued filming and even pushed his head further into the mud while laughing. They did not know that he was struggling to breathe in the shallow water, trapped and unable to lift his head. The scene was horrifying to watch, made worse by the loud laughter and cheering of everyone around him, completely oblivious to his pain. Finally, after what felt like forever, Tetsushi was lifted out of the mud and the camera returned to the main broadcast. Miraculously, he survived the accident, but only just. Experts say that even a few more seconds in the mud could have been fatal. Despite being paralyzed, Tetsushi learned to live with his condition. He even returned to the show in later years in some capacity. While this story is one of the most disturbing and shocking live TV accidents ever recorded, it ended on a small note of hope because Tetsushi survived and managed to find a way to keep being part of the world he loved. Bill Shirk, 1987. On the 66th anniversary of Houdini's death, famous escape artist Bill Shirk attempted one of the most dangerous stunts of his life. He decided to be buried alive for live TV while handcuffed and covered in cement. The stunt almost killed him, but miraculously, he survived. Bill planned everything very carefully. He would be locked in a plexiglass coffin while wearing police handcuffs and leg chains. The coffin would then be lowered into a hole in the ground, and dirt would be piled on top. Once the dirt reached about a foot above the coffin, cement would be poured over it, completely covering him. He had to escape while trapped under tons of dirt and concrete. Bill explained that this stunt was inspired by Houdini. He wanted to honor Houdini's memory and prove that he was the best escape artist alive. He even raised money for charity through his stunts. Bill had a backhoe operator ready to dig him up in case of emergency. He also had a two-way radio to communicate with his assistant, Roy Huffman, while inside the coffin. Despite all precautions, the stunt was extremely dangerous, and Bill admitted it was almost suicidal. When the stunt began, Bill was locked into the coffin and lowered into the 6-foot-deep hole. Dirt was poured around him first, and then cement was added. The weight of the wet dirt and concrete caused the coffin to start collapsing sooner than expected. Bill was trapped, disoriented, and running out of air. He fought to survive, using every bit of energy he had to push his arm up through the dirt and make space to breathe. He swallowed dirt and got it in his nose and mouth, but he never gave up. Finally, the backhoe reached him, and the crew helped dig him out. Bill survived the stunt, but he was covered in mud, cement, and completely exhausted. Despite surviving, Bill admitted the stunt was far from a success. He did not escape the coffin on his own, and it could have easily killed him. The danger of being trapped under so much dirt and cement was extreme, and even small mistakes could have been fatal. Bill learned from the experience and never attempted such a stunt again. He survived by luck, careful planning, and the quick actions of his assistant and backhoe operator. The stunt remains one of the most terrifying and extreme escape acts ever attempted on live television. Gary Plauché shooting, 1984. In 1984, America was full of music, movies, and excitement. But in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a quiet family was about to face a nightmare that would shock the whole country. Gary and June Plauché lived a normal life with their children, including their 11-year-old son, Jody. They wanted him to learn discipline and confidence, so they enrolled him in karate classes at a small local school. His instructor was a young man named Jeff Doucette. At first, Jeff seemed friendly, kind, and good with kids. He offered Jody rides to and from class, spent time with him after lessons, and soon became close to the Plauché family. Gary and June trusted him completely. They believed he truly cared about their son. But behind that friendly smile, Jeff was hiding something dark. One February weekend in 1984, Jeff told Jody's parents that he wanted to take him to Dallas for a karate tournament. That didn't sound unusual since tournaments were a normal part of training. Gary and June agreed, thinking their son was safe. But when the weekend ended and Jody didn't come home, their fear began to grow. They called the karate school and learned the truth. There was no tournament in Dallas. Jeff had lied and had taken Jody across the country. For days, the Plauché family lived through pure terror. Police and the FBI began searching across several states. Meanwhile, Jeff had taken Jody to California, keeping him hidden in a motel while he hurt and controlled him. The family could only wait and hope their son would be found alive. The big break came when Jeff made phone calls back home. Investigators traced the calls to a motel in Anaheim, and on February 29th, police and FBI agents stormed the room. Jody was found alive after more than a week in captivity. Jeff was arrested and taken into custody. For Gary, it was both relief and rage. His son was safe, but the thought of what Jeff had done filled him with anger and pain. When Jeff was being flown back to Baton Rouge to face trial, news cameras gathered at the airport to film his arrival. It was supposed to be a normal prisoner transfer, but it would soon turn into one of the most shocking moments ever seen on live television. As Jeff was being led through the airport in handcuffs, Gary was waiting nearby, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. He had a small revolver hidden in his pocket. As Jeff walked past, surrounded by police, Gary turned, raised the gun, and shot him once in the head. The entire scene was caught on live TV. People watching at home saw the man fall instantly. The terminal filled with chaos as deputies tackled Gary to the ground. When asked why he did it, Gary said nothing. He didn't resist. The man who had kidnapped and hurt his son was dead before ever facing trial. News of the shooting spread fast. Some were shocked, calling it murder. Others quietly supported Gary, saying they would have done the same if it were their child. He was charged with murder, but when the case went to court, public opinion was clear. Many saw him as a father pushed too far, not a criminal. In the end, Gary pleaded no contest to manslaughter. His punishment was 5 years of probation and community service, with no time in prison. Gary later said he didn't regret what he did, only that it happened in front of cameras. His son Jody grew up and became a child safety advocate, teaching families how to recognize harm being done to children. He said that killing Jeff didn't undo what happened to him, but he understood why his father did it. The airport footage still circulates decades later, one of the most disturbing and unforgettable moments ever shown on live TV. Monica Seles stabbing, 1993. In the early 1990s, Monica Seles was one of the biggest stars in women's tennis. Between 1991 and 1993, she won 22 titles and reached the finals in 33 of the 34 tournaments she played. Her record was almost perfect, with 159 wins and only 12 losses. She had already won 7 of the last 8 Grand Slam tournaments and was seen as unstoppable. Her main rival was Steffi Graf, a German tennis legend who had dominated the sport for years and won 10 Grand Slam titles. But Monica's rise pushed Graf out of the #1 spot, and a new era in tennis had begun. On April 30th, 1993, everything changed. Monica was only 19 years old and playing in the Citizen Cup in Hamburg, Germany. She was leading her quarterfinal match and was just a few points away from victory when something terrible happened. During a break between games, Monica sat down to rest and leaned forward to grab her towel. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her back. At first, she didn't understand what had happened. Her opponent, confused by the noise, thought Monica had simply fallen, but within moments it became clear that she had been stabbed. Her attacker was a 38-year-old man named Günther Paret. He had used a long kitchen knife to stab Monica between the shoulder blades. Security quickly tackled him before he could strike again, but the damage was done. The knife had missed her spinal cord by less than a centimeter, which saved her from being paralyzed. The attack happened so quickly that even the TV cameras missed it. Players and officials rushed to help her as she cried out in pain. At first, many believed the attack might have been political, since Monica was from Yugoslavia and had received threats because of the war happening there. But the truth turned out to be even more disturbing. Günther Paret was not acting out of politics. He was an obsessed fan of Steffi Graf. He could not handle seeing Monica take Graf's place as the #1 player in the world. In his twisted mind, the only way to help his idol was to hurt Monica, forcing her to leave tennis so that Graf could return to the top. Though Monica's physical injuries healed within weeks, the emotional wounds were far deeper. She began to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and struggled with fear and anxiety. Her father, who was also her coach, became very ill shortly after the attack and passed away 2 years later. To cope with the pain and loneliness, Monica turned to food, developing a binge eating disorder that lasted for years. She later said that the evenings were the hardest. After long days of practice, she would eat uncontrollably just to escape her thoughts. When her attacker went to trial later that year, the outcome shocked the world. The German court decided that Günther Paret was mentally unstable and did not intend to seriously harm her. Because of this, he received no jail time and was released with a suspended sentence. Monica was devastated. She refused to play in Germany again, saying she didn't feel safe knowing the man who stabbed her was walking free. She also lost an appeal to have the case retried, as well as a lawsuit against the Tennis Federation for poor security. 2 years after the attack, Monica made an incredible return to tennis. In August 1995, she stepped back onto the court, winning the Canadian Open and reaching the US Open final soon after. In 1996, she won the Australian Open, her 9th and final Grand Slam title. But even though she remained one of the top players for years, she was never quite the same. The fear, trauma, and years away from the game had changed everything. Monica Seles retired in 2008, leaving behind one of the most tragic what-if stories in sports history. Many believe that if that day in 1993 had never happened, she might have gone on to break every record in women's tennis. But because of one man's obsession, and a single horrifying moment, her incredible career was forever altered. Xuxa Park Fire, 2001. On January 11, 2001, famous Brazilian actress, singer, and model Xuxa was performing her TV show, Xuxa Park, live on stage. The show was very popular with young children, featuring fun games, dance numbers, cartoons, and exciting futuristic sets. It had been running since 1994 and was still going strong. On this day, about 300 children were in the studio to watch and take part in the show. Xuxa led the program with her usual energy, moving from one segment to the next. By the end of the episode, all the performers gathered on stage for a final musical number. What was meant to be a spectacular ending quickly turned into a nightmare. Just over a minute after the performance began, a fire broke out on the set. In an instant, the bright and colorful stage turned into a dark and dangerous scene. Flames spread quickly, and the camera captured the chaos just before it was nearly destroyed. The dancers and children on stage did not realize the danger at first. A staff member rushed in to try to put out the fire, but it was too late. The entire spaceship set was engulfed in flames, causing panic. Nearby was the show's famous Ferris wheel, where children were riding at that very moment. One boy became trapped in a seat, unable to get away from the fire. Fortunately, a group of brave people rushed to help him and managed to free him safely. Investigators later determined that the fire started because of a short circuit in an electrical vehicle. The set was completely destroyed, turning to ash and rubble. Despite the chaos, nearly all 300 children and the staff managed to escape, suffering only some injuries. The only thing lost completely was the show itself. Xuxa Park was canceled after this disaster, and no more episodes were ever filmed. Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn were a German duo who became world famous for their magical stage performances that featured wild animals, especially white tigers and lions. They met while working on a cruise ship in the 1960s and soon started performing together. Their shows were full of wonder and excitement, mixing illusions and circus acts that amazed everyone who saw them. They were given a huge opportunity to perform at the Mirage in Las Vegas, where they quickly became one of the most popular acts in the city. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people came to see them perform. Their shows were grand and beautiful, and the sight of the giant white tigers sharing the stage with them became their trademark. Roy had always loved animals. As a child, he was very close to his dog, and he often said that this bond taught him how to understand and connect with animals later in life. While Siegfried focused on the magic tricks, Roy would work directly with the animals, commanding the tigers and lions to perform tricks and stunts. He treated them with care and respect, often raising them from birth. He kept dozens of big cats at his home in Las Vegas, where they freely roamed around and even slept in his room. To him, they were not just show animals, they were family. But on October 3rd, 2003, everything changed. That night, during one of their live shows, Roy brought out one of his favorite tigers, a white tiger named Manticore. The audience cheered as the massive animal walked onto the stage beside him. Roy told the crowd it was Manticore's debut, even though the tiger had performed with him many times before. They had worked together for years and knew each other well. Everything seemed normal until suddenly something appeared to go wrong. Some said the tiger might have been startled by something in the audience, because Manticore suddenly turned his attention away from Roy and moved toward the crowd. Trying to protect the people in the front row, Roy stepped in front of the tiger and told it to lie down. But instead of calming down, Manticore grabbed Roy's arm in his mouth. Roy tried to get free and shouted commands, but the tiger didn't respond. It then struck Roy's legs and knocked him to the floor before biting into his neck and dragging him off stage. The audience was horrified as they realized this was not part of the show. Trainers and staff rushed to help, using fire extinguishers to get the tiger to release Roy. Eventually, Manticore let go and ran backstage to his cage. Roy was badly injured. The tiger's bite had cut through an artery and damaged his windpipe and spine. He was bleeding heavily and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked for hours to save his life. His heart stopped several times during surgery, but the doctors managed to bring him back. Against all odds, Roy survived, though he was left partially paralyzed and had to relearn how to walk and talk. Even while lying in the ambulance, he told the rescuers, "Don't shoot the cat." He never blamed Manticore for what happened. In the months that followed, there were many different stories about what caused the attack. Some believed the tiger became confused because Roy had changed the routine that night. Others thought that Roy might have suffered a medical issue, such as a stroke, and that the tiger was only trying to drag him to safety. Roy himself said he believed Manticore was protecting him, not attacking him. After the incident, Siegfried and Roy's shows ended, and animal rights groups called for wild animals to be banned from stage performances. Manticore spent the rest of his life at their home, where he was cared for until he died 10 years later at the age of 17.